Hello, we meet again. This is stretching the bounds of credibility, isn't it? That we two should meet on 3 successive occasions like this, week after week. First Bruges, then last week in Brussels, and then today in Antwerp. Are you following me? Well, it's not a bad thing to have followers, is it really? No. I'm joking. I don't really think you're a spy. Well, for a start, would a spy ask me if I thought they were a spy? Actually, a good spy might well ask me if I thought they were a spy on the basis that they would anticipate that them asking if I thought that they were a spy was allaying my fears. But I don't think you're a spy, no. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some spies here, mind you. Your Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, after all, takes a lively interest in the county of his birth. Was he not born? You see, I'm learning. Was he not born in Ghent? Yes, I think he was. Well, yes, and that, I suppose, and the fact that this is where the powers collide, isn't it? This is where they cross lances and lock swords. France and the Empire and England. So there may well be spies hereabouts. Well, I have my suspicions about that piper in the corner. They say that musicians make the best spies, don't they? Because they can move around and no one ever pays any attention. Not that you'd need a spy, really, to figure out what we've been doing over the course of the last week or so. We've been buying swords. Quite a lot of swords. 2,000 swords for the King's triumph, and I'm pretty sure the King doesn't give 2 hoots if the world knows that we've been about his business, because after all, that's part of the point, isn't it? He wants the world to know what he's doing. No, that's right, 2,000, well, not quite 2,000 swords, but not far off. Near as makes no difference. Different kinds of swords, mostly Milan swords, which are your sort of workhorse single-handed swords, and then a few hundred heavy swords and a few score two-handed swords. Well, mainly because there are different challenges in the tournament. Besides the joust, I mean. We talked about the joust, or the tilt, I should say, last week, didn't we? So you know about that, but there are also other challenges. So there's the tourney, which will follow the joust, and the tourney involves knights on horseback fighting each other with heavy swords, and that's why we have to have the heavy swords, because they take a real battering by St. Martin, they do, and so you have to have heavy swords with a good solid massy tang that runs through the hilt to the pommel, because if that, which is sometimes, because you don't see it, armourers try and cheat you on that, if that breaks, the whole thing falls apart. And then after the tourney, you've got your battles on foot. And your battles on foot are, again, there are different kinds. So the first one will be with puncheon spears across barriers. So you hold them in your hand and you thrash out at each other, followed up by swords. And then the second challenge will be casting darts and two-handed swords. And that's our king's speciality, the old two-handed sword. I pity the knight that stands in our king's path when he's lobbing a spear in his general direction and then having at him with a two-handed sword. Well, you need a lot of room. Mainly, there's a lot of space required, but mercifully, God be praised, that's not my problem. No, that's the Earl of Worcester who has to work that out, and I think they're still working it out, because it's a bone of some contention between us and the French as to exactly how big it is, where it's positioned between Guisnes and Ardres, but the thrust of it is it will be between those two towns. The last I heard, it's going to be about 300 yards long, about 100 yards wide. It's going to be surrounded by a ditch and a bulwark and a barricade to keep the unwanted out. And then it will have triumphal arches at either end, arming chambers for the French king and for our king. And then obviously the things that are inside the tilt area, or the field, including the tilt rail itself, which will be running east to west, close enough so that the royal pavilion where the great nobles will sit and the queens will sit and see what's going on, an area for the tourney to take place, and then barriers, lower barriers for the foot combat. Yes, and all of that will be built. All of that has to be built in the next few weeks, and we have to continue our purchases for the next few weeks. It's interesting to think, isn't it, really, that in some ways what we're building in its space of 300 by 100 yards is almost like what happens here in the Low Countries. It's where the great powers will lock in combat one with another, except it won't be real, will it? It won't be real. And better that it should be in sport than war, right? Anyway, I think the Piper's about to start up. And if I learnt anything in Scotland back in 13 when I accompanied the Queen on that military enterprise, it's when the Pipers stand up, you've got three choices. You've got to drink, you've got to dance, or you've got to make a dash for it. I don't know what you prefer. Well, I don't fancy dashing, and I'm not a dab out at dancing, so drink it is. Cheers.